All right, guys. So we're at the point right now where our player sprite interacts with the walls and everything's going great. The next thing we need to do is make it so that our player sprite interacts with our goal sprite. Now, to do that, there's a couple different ways we can do this. And one of the great things about code is there's always different ways you can solve problems. But what we're going to use to solve this problem is one of the most powerful tools that you have in programming, and that's what's called a variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a variable that will make it so that we can change what happens with three different sprites all at the same time. Some of you may be familiar with using messages, and messages are great, but they lack some of the capabilities that variables have. So we're going to use variables, and it's going to be an adjustment, but it's one that is really big steps in programming. So that doesn't matter, but here's how we're going to get started. So the basic thing that we're going to need to look for is when our player sprite touches our goal sprite, we want a few things to be set in motion. First, we're going to need to change our maze to the second maze level. Second, we're going to need to move our player sprite, and likely we're also going to need to move our goal sprite. So all of those things need to happen and set up for the second layer or the second level of the maze. So in order to do those things, we're going to introduce a variable. So the first step towards that process is actually creating the variable. So what we're going to do is in our programming window down, the second from the bottom is our variables tab, and it's kind of like a dark orange. If we click on that dark orange, we can see that the top choice is to actually make a variable. So we're going to click on make a variable, and we're going to name this variable level. Now, really important that this variable be able to be applied to all sprites so that it will work with our player sprite, our maze sprite, and our goal sprite all at the same time. That's really important. So we're going to leave it as for all sprites. We've named it. We'll click OK. We can see right now that we have a viewable window that shows us our sprite, our variable. Over here in that variable window, if we deselect the level variable, we can make that view go away. But for now, we're going to leave it selected so that we can see what our variable is as we do things with our code. Once we've made our variable, the next thing we want to do is make it so that our variable does something, or our variable is at least accounting for something. So what we're going to do first is make it so that when the player sprite touches the goal sprite, our variable changes. And that change in our variable will give us the ability to control different things happening in our game. How do we do it? Well, we're going to start with a control block, and that, not surprisingly, is going to be an if-then block. So we'll put a new if-then block underneath all our other code that we have in our game right now. What's the sensing block we need? Well, if we go to sensing, the top sensing block is the one we need. That touching mouse pointer block, we'll put that in. We'll change it from mouse pointer to our goal sprite. So again, lots of different choices we have, but the goal sprite is what we want. So we'll click goal. So when our player sprite is touching our goal, we want to change our variable. So if we go to the variable blocks, we're going to bring it's kind of the fourth block in, change level by 1. So we'll put that in our code. And one other thing that's really important, when we change our variable, we have to stop touching the goal sprite, or our variable will continue to change. So we're going to go to motion and bring a go to XY block and put that right underneath our change in the variable. If we flag now and click start, and we move our player sprite through our maze, we get all the way, taking a long time, all the way to our goal sprite. When we touch our goal sprite, you can see the level changed from 0 to 1, and then our player came back to the beginning. Now, What do we want to do with that level changing, that variable changing from 0 to 1? We want to do a couple things. The first thing we want to do, or maybe the most important thing we want to do, is we want to change our actual level. So I'm going to click on our maze sprite, make myself disappear a little bit. And in when backdrop switches the game, we've got to introduce a few things into our maze sprite to make it function. First, we're going to go to control. We're going to bring in a forever loop so that it keeps checking over and over again what we're looking for. And the thing we're looking for is an if-then statement. So again, in control, an if-then statement. This is one of the first times we're going to put something that's not in the sensing blocks in our if-then statement. So we're going to go to operators, and we're going to bring in a blank equals to 50 block and put it there. But we're not going to say 50, we're going to say 1. So if, and we go to variables and pull in level, if level equals 1, then we want to change our costume to the next costume. Now, that means two things. We have to fix something we didn't do earlier. But first, let's switch costume to maze level 2. If you're thinking through this, you should see that there's going to be a problem, and that is we don't have in our game earlier making sure that our costume is maze level 1. So we're going to bring that in also. When we switch to game, we want to make sure that we start on maze level 1. Now, there's other things that we got to think about. So right now, our maze level is at 1. So if we flag now and click start, you can see we're already on maze level, on our second maze level. So we missed a step, and that's okay, in our very beginning. So if we go back to player, we can see that when we're touching goal, we change that level, but we never started by making sure that our level was starting on the number it needs to be. So if we go to variables, right here, when we switch our backdrop to start, we want to set that level back to 0. Now when I click start, I click the flag, I go to my start screen and click start. I start on maze level 1, and then when I navigate through my maze and finally get to that gold sprite, I go to maze level 2. You should see here that we've got some problems with our player sprite and our goal sprite. So we've got to fix those things also when we get to that maze level 1. But we'll do that in the next video. Hope everything's good right now. Again, watch, pause, do is your real key to getting through this video. Good job.